Kim Hall. Kim, I guess.
There we go. All right. And again, just a reminder, if you have not, if you're not presenting tonight, please mute your audio. I am Kathy Platnick. Welcome tonight. I am the co-chair of the Missions Committee at Rolling Hills United Methodist Church, along with Kim Hall. We're delighted to have so many people interested in this extremely important topic. So thank you very much for joining us and making this a part of your evening. I am delighted tonight to introduce to you our two presenters. Our first one of our presenters is Nancy Wilcox. Nancy is currently co-chair of the South Bay Coalition to End Homelessness. She's been in that position for many years, and as part of that, and in a variety of capacities, she focuses on increasing the amount of public homelessness funding coming into the South Bay. In her professional life, Nancy was a software systems engineer for Northrop, and she is still active in the faith community as a member of St. Peter's by the Sea Presbyterian Church up here in Palos Verdes. Our other presenter is Amber Sheikh Ginsberg. Amber is the managing senior associate at Thurlow Associates, where she provides strategic counsel and assistance to nonprofit clients working in human services, health, and other fields. She's been for about a little over a year a member of the Harbor Area Planning Commission. She was appointed to that by Mayor Eric Garcetti from Los Angeles. She also serves as the mayor's Harbor Area Homelessness Organizing Committee on that committee. They have much more extensive bios, but we have a lot we want to get to, so I just thought I would try to hit the highlights in doing this. So the way we're going to do this tonight is trying to do an interactive discussion where I'm going to pose some questions, and then Amber and Nancy will sometimes be the sole person answering the questions. Sometimes we'll flop it back and forth. But the goal is trying to really cover a variety of pieces of the homeless crisis and help you leave tonight with a better understanding of the scope of this problem, what really is causing it, and how we can actually fix it. So, that's really our goal for tonight in terms of educating.
Put it up.
Say, Carol, I think that you are not muted. Is it possible for, or Kim, are you able to mute them? Okay, so my first question tonight is, let's start, Nancy, with you. So for Nancy, what do you think is the biggest misconception that people have about homelessness generally, just generally across the board? What would you say is the biggest misconception about homelessness?
I think the largest one that I hear often, like day in and day out, is that I hear statements like everybody who's homeless has a mental illness, everybody is on drugs or takes alcohol. And the statistics just really don't bear that out. And I don't know if you want to bring up,
we can put up
slide 9. So what we do is, some of you are familiar that we do an annual homeless count at the end of January. And as part of that, we get the numbers of who's experiencing homelessness in each community. But we also get some interesting demographic information, including how many people do have severe mental illness. And I don't know if you're able to show the chart, but
I think Kim's working on it. Kim, is
okay.
Slide 9, Kim.
But what this chart will show is that consistently, year after year, with this annual homeless count, the number of people who have severe mental illness is usually about maybe 25 to 30%. So it's really a small percentage of the overall 100%. And we're going to get into this a few minutes later, but we are going to talk about then who is homeless. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of a preview that, there's a lot of different groups, that there's a lot of first-time people who are homeless. And again, one of the things that, one of the facts that we know from the homeless count is that of the newly homeless people from last year, they cite 60% of the reason that they became homeless is because of an economic hardship that they had.
Yeah, we're going to get into that in a little bit. So let's hold on that for just a minute.
Okay.
So Kim, let's just check, because we have Nancy put a lot of time into putting this great PowerPoint together for us. And Kim, I just wanted to check to see if, no,
I apologize. I had muted myself. When I rebooted my system, my PowerPoint went away. So
Of
I am
course.
just trying to find it for us again. I apologize.
All right, so well, let's keep going because we'll come back to that. We can plop up that slide when we get the PowerPoint back up. So, so mental illness is one of the big conceptions. So Nancy had said a number of people are homeless even without having a mental illness or a substance abuse problem. So Amber, from your perspective, what do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions that people have about homelessness generally?
Yeah, I think one of the big misconceptions, especially that I hear a lot, I'm interfacing, you know, with a lot of the public, is that what we see out there, so what the folks that we see on the street or the folks that we just see visibly are who we project as the population. And you know, I often use San Pedro as a reference just because we have a very large number of homeless individuals. We have about 500. The last count was I think the last count was right around 500. But I always ask people, well, how many do you actually see with your eyes before I give them that data point? And some people are like, I see 30 or I see 50 or, you know, even I've spoken to our LAPD, I've done ride-alongs with some of our homeless outreach teams, and I'll speak to them and they're like, well, we work with like, I'd say 80 chronically homeless individuals. And I like to say then, well, do you think, why don't you work with the other 400 then? Well, you don't see them. Do you think they're all the same? And I remember actually having a conversation with a police officer who's like, there's not 400 more. And I was like, there are. And it was just eye-opening that there are all these homeless individuals or, you know, individuals experiencing homelessness that we don't actually see. And so I just encourage people to go through that thought exercise when you look at the data for your area or areas you drive through. And true, we do see people, and usually what we see on the street are very exacerbated situations. Folks that are suffering maybe with mental illness or substance abuse or both, or self-medicating in some way, but it's not usually an actual, it's really not a good picture of the entirety of the issue, the system, and the many, many humans, individual people going through this. So.
And I want to come back to that point in a minute because I do think that's an issue in particular with the broader South Bay as well. So for South Bay purposes, we're really looking at the definition that includes the beach cities, Wilmington, San Pedro, the Palos Verdes area. And so we'll talk about that more because I really want to have that conversation with the slide when Kim gets the slide presentation up. So Nancy, let me turn back to you for a minute. In terms of other myths, what about the idea that everybody who's homeless is just homeless because they're lazy and what they really ought to do is just go get a job?
Right. And again, statistics really bear out that a lot of people actually have jobs. And some of the statistics that we also gathered during the homeless count are the number of people living in vehicles. And when you talk to those folks, a lot of them have jobs. They're just minimum paying jobs and they just can't afford rent. A lot of people are on fixed income. Maybe they have SSI and so forth. So there's just a lot of myths about that, about these people are working. And again, one of the other slides that we'll get into is there's also, let's see, do you have, I don't know if you can bring up slide 8. I don't know if you're able to. If not, that's not a problem.
She's got the presentation open now. We just need to get to the right page. So we're looking for.
I apologize.
No worries. No worries.
Kim, just hit the right arrow key to keep passing through these because you're early on in the presentation.
Right. I've lost my tiles. I'm sorry.
No worries. Just hit your right arrow key down on the bottom right of your keyboard, and we'll just go back.
Okay.
It's not working.
So one of the things on.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, there you
now
go.
We're there.
When you get to slide 8, there you go.
Yep, there we go.
So I talked a little bit about what's in the first bullet and that several people really do already have jobs. But the other thing too I wanted to really lift up is that a lot of people who do want to find employment just have difficulty because of maybe they don't have a fixed address, they may have had a criminal record, and just a lot of other reasons. So there's a lot of systemic reasons that we're also trying to work through within the homeless services world. So there isn't an easy answer for anything having to do with homelessness. So, but there really are we really do want to dispel this myth, though, that people, again, are just lazy and that, they want to live off the government, they just want the benefits and so forth. That the facts just don't bear that out.
And Kim, now that we have the PowerPoint open, why don't we go back, why don't we go on to slide 9? This is the mental illness thing that we started with in terms of the myths there, where you can see the point that Nancy was making, that it's only 25% that have mental illness, and then 30% are the use disorder. Those were the numbers you were giving us, right, Nancy?
Yes. And one thing, again, you can see on this, so what happens is once people are living on the streets, it is more common for them to self-medicate, and that's just a survival mechanism for them. So I think but they didn't necessarily have the substance use disorder, and that's what drove them into homelessness. So we really want to kind of dispel that myth as well.
And so on the same issue about kind of myths, so Amber, I don't know how much of the 400 and some odd that we have in San Pedro that you work with regularly, how many of those folks are really part of the domestic violence scene as opposed to some of these other problems? Is that an issue that you see a lot?
I mean, it is an issue we see a lot. And honestly, I don't know how well it's captured, because it's not like, so some of the folks that I work with around the South Bay have experienced domestic violence, but I wouldn't say that that's the reason. Like if someone had a checkbox of how you ended up on the street, it would be like these 5 things were it. It's not usually like a singular path. It's the most common story is this happened, then this happened, and then this happened. And so when it comes to domestic violence, I mean, we see violence against women on the street is almost universal. She Does, which is a movement to represent homeless women specifically, basically has captured that over 90% of women who are on the street who have experienced homelessness at some point have been sexually assaulted, either before or during. And so this also harkens back to Nancy's point about self-medication. And I really do encourage people, even though this is the tough work, is to go there yourself for a moment. You're a woman, it's your first night out there. Maybe you couch surf for a while, you stayed with friends, you slept in your car, all these things happen. And finally you're at this place and you're assaulted. How do you cope after a while? And it's a tragic thing to think about, but it also takes you through this thought exercise of what it's like to be out there. And another thing that I do think is something we don't think about a lot is the age of some of our homeless population.
Let's pull up slide 13 because it covers some of these points. Kim, if you can get there. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, this is really important, is that it's not, I think on the street sometimes we see like younger people or, people that are, we think in San Pedro, I hear a lot, they're partying out there. But I can't describe enough how many seniors I see out there, or especially women. And I think of women a lot specifically who have been assaulted out there and who maybe became homeless for the first time in their 60s or 70s.
And one of you talked to this whole issue about the issue about how many children are unhoused. I mean, Nancy's got the statistic up here of, this is just the South Bay, right, Nancy? The 19% that you're talking about here?
It is. So it's those are experiencing homelessness. So I want to just mention that the county has had a longstanding policy where they do not want to see any minor age child homeless. So they've actually prioritized a lot of funding. This is like pre-Measure H, and this is, again, it goes back for many years. So that's why you don't see as many, even though this is an alarming number.
Yeah,
it actually could be much higher. So the good news is there are many resources for families with minor age children.
Yeah, I actually about 10 years ago worked at an agency in Long Beach that worked with homeless families that have children between 6 weeks and 6 years old. And most of our families, because of this program, and this is, a decade ago now, you know, they got motel vouchers or they were in temporary shelters. It is pretty rare to see children living on the streets because of the way our system is set up to prioritize them, just like Nancy said. Yeah.
Most of the families that you see experiencing homelessness in the South Bay as well as across the county, actually a lot of them are doubled up with friends or else they are living in vehicles, and that's what the latest homeless count also revealed. So you don't see too many intents, and fortunately in some of the encampments that you might see, if you know about where some of those are located in the South Bay. But families also want to be hidden. So again, a lot of what you'll hear me talk about are statistics from the homeless count. And I use those because those are the official numbers, but that's also a way to kind of do a year-to-year comparison. But we also know that that isn't perfect and it doesn't capture everybody. And we also know that families do not want to be seen during the homeless count because they're very much afraid that their children might be taken away from them. So they do everything they can to be very hidden. So I believe that there's really an undercount from the official numbers, shall we say.
Yeah, and Nancy, I didn't include from your bio that you've been actively involved in the last 7 times that they've done the homeless count, which is admirable. Okay, so now going back to something that Amber had mentioned about the hidden nature, which, you know, to me, that's part of the mythology of here in the South Bay, right? Where, especially here in the South Bay area, we think, it isn't that bad, right? We see the 80 in Los Angeles and it's really 497. So Kim, why don't you put up slide number, let's see here. Let's do 5, slide 5, because I think this gets to the point that Amber was talking about. And, you know, this is kind of an astonishing statistic from my perspective of seeing here the number of homeless that are counted in Torrance, which I think is a surprise to people. Nancy, you want to talk to that a little bit?
Sure, and actually the next slide shows it even more. So what I've done was just take some of the neighborhoods right around your church in Palos Verdes, and what it looks here is the unsheltered. Well, go ahead.
No, you
right. I can speak to the Torrance one. So the chart on the left-hand side shows all of these previous neighborhoods. So it's the 4 communities, the cities on the Hill, Redondo Beach, City of Torrance, and the neighborhood of San Pedro in the city of Los Angeles. So I just took those numbers and just kind of plotted them out just so you could kind of see. But one of the things that unfortunately stands out for Torrance is that their homelessness has just skyrocketed in the past 6 years or so, 5 or 6 years. And in fact, I think their combined total has gone up well over 250% just in the past year. So when you look at that though, it's really important to not just look at the overall number, but to actually look at how people are experiencing homelessness. So that's why we have this other chart here on the right-hand side. So the upper line, it starts off with 2016, it has 57 people. That orange line, it shows how many people are living in vehicles. So each year that has gone up just steadily year after year after year. So that tells us a lot about the population though, because as I mentioned before, folks who live in vehicles typically have some kind of income. So the type of aid that they need is a lot less because they are able to be gainfully employed. So but it also tells us too the type of maybe either shelters that they might need. There are programs that you may have heard about called safe parking programs. So there's specific interventions that are really looking to target how people are experiencing homelessness. So that's why we really like to look at how people are homeless, so we can just bring those appropriate resources so some of these people don't have to live in their cars or have a safe place to park or have someplace warm that they can go. But it's also important because all of these services also provide case management. So it isn't just, getting people off the streets is of course first and foremost, because we do care for their safety, make sure that they have, substantial meals and so forth. But the other important aspect is we really want to make sure that they are getting some kind of case management. So that's why these programs are really important as well.
So I have spent a fair amount of time in communities back east where it always shocks me that there are homeless on the streets in the snow. But Amber, can you talk to the issue about the mythology that a bunch of the folks that are homeless here in Los Angeles or in the South Bay are homeless here because they came here for our great weather.
Yeah, so we have a slide for that, and as much as
We have a
that's
slide for that.
Yeah, we-
for that. And as much as that is a lovely idea, I mean, didn't we all come to Los Angeles at some point? Most of us, the vast majority of us, because of the nice weather. But
Kim, it's slide 10, Kim.
the vast majority of our homeless population, 70% or above, have lived here for a long time, for over 10 years. And most of the folks that I come across have roots here and or stay here because, like Nancy said, they work around here, or they have family around here. They're familiar with it. They know the services, all of these things. So once again, the data just does not support this idea of this mass exodus of people coming from the cold areas of the country to Los Angeles because it's like the homeless motherland or something. But they're ours. And we need to remember that.
Yeah. All right. So now that we've talked about some of these myths, let's talk about, Nancy started to touch on some of the issues. I think you've both actually touched on some of the issues that cause this problem. Like for example, the economic issues. So Kim, why don't you move to slide 15? And maybe you guys could take turns talking a little bit about some of these things. And Nancy, we can start with you about some of these causes for homelessness.
Sure. So we have two slides here. The first one addresses more societal causes, and I'm not going to read through these, but you can just look, and the ones that we hit upon time and time again is just the severe lack of affordable housing. There was a study actually published just this last month, I'm sorry, that showed that in Los Angeles County alone, we're lacking over 500,000 affordable housing units. So that's just a tremendous number. So, and you know,
of these societal factors, are there ones that you think are more prevalent or more? I mean, Amber talked about how it's this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Is there something you can point to here that you think is like beside, I guess, the lack of affordable housing is probably number one, right?
Sure. I think housing and the economic factors, again, wages just aren't keeping up with the rising rents. But one of the things that's really getting its due and a lot of discussion now across the entire country is just the systematic racism that unfortunately we have had, not just here in Los Angeles, but again, just throughout the country. There's just been a lot of bias in lending practices, and this goes back decades. I mean, even well into the last century. And some people might be familiar with the term of redlining, where people of color just weren't allowed to even purchase or to rent in certain parts of, in this case, LA County, but it's prevalent in other places as well. And a lot of the racial aspect are really starting to be addressed now. And there's also some statistics too that talk about the number of African Americans as a percentage of population in Los Angeles County versus the number that are homeless. And there's probably 4 or 5 times more people who are homeless in that particular group than any other ethnicity. So one of the things that there's an organization, government agency called the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, or LAHSA. They are the ones who conduct this annual homeless count, among doing many other things. But a few years ago, they had an ad hoc committee on African Americans experiencing homelessness, and they came up with just a wonderful report that goes into this much more in depth. So just in terms of the causes, as well as several solutions that I know a lot of the city of Los Angeles and the county are adopting now, just to try and make some of these changes moving forward.
And I don't mean to call out Manhattan Beach, but there was actually a big article in the Los Angeles Times just recently about their history on the whole redlining and some of those other issues.
The Bruce's Beach, yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
go ahead, Amber.
I was just going to say on the redlining, 2 stories just quickly on, so I grew up in Palos Verdes Estates, and a good friend of mine, her parents, when they moved in, being a family of color, this was in the 70s, that people went to the city to say that they shouldn't be able to buy their house. And then when my parents built and bought their house in the 80s, something similar happened. So I think we a lot of times think, not us, no way, or, we're educated, we're you know, we're open to things, but I always remember hearing those stories growing up and being like, that's not possible, but very much so. Yeah, very much so.
And in fairness, I'm calling out Manhattan Beach, but there's been a ton of coverage on Portland for the same issue. Exactly.
Right. And it's everywhere. It's not, that's not in any way me singling anything out, just personal experience.
Right. So Amber, you want to talk to some of these issues on the, so Nancy was talking about the societal.
Yeah. There's like systemic issues,
right.
And then there's the personal issues where and all of that comes into play because, you know, a person lives within a system and then lives within their own environment as well. But the things we see here, obviously, it comes down to income. And one thing I always like to say is, because a lot of people say, oh my goodness, you know, you spend so much time on homelessness. There's so many other issues. And what I like to say is, well, homelessness, I think, sits at the apex of so many of our issues. And if we can really get underneath homelessness and solve it or alleviate it in any way, shape, or form, by having done that, we will have solved so many other issues around healthcare, around mental health, around education, around incarceration, around equity, all of those things, because this is all of it. And for us to truly solve it, we need to get underneath all of that. We can't just Band-Aid this solution. So a lot of things that I see out there are, you know, unresolved childhood trauma. Another thing that I'm a huge advocate for, having personal experience, is maternal mental health issues. I see a lot of things through that lens because I know a lot of women that are experiencing homelessness now that had undiagnosed maternal mental health issues. And as someone who is a, you know, survivor of that, I can very much understand how that is an initial domino in a lot of this. And really, when it comes to housing, we have supply and demand issues. Like Nancy was talking about housing being an issue. I just want to say that too, because we have all these other issues, systemic issues, and then people's personal issues. But if at the end of it, we just don't have enough housing stock that's affordable, all of these things add up and then just end up with homelessness. Because if there's not something there to catch us, we will fall. But yes, I mean, the personal issues run the gamut, like you can see right here: substance abuse, mental health. But one stat that we found about, I think it was about 1.5 years ago, the Everyone In campaign through United Way pulled for the Harbor area. So this is Harbor City, San Pedro, and Wilmington. 1 out of 8 individuals was one qualifying event away from homelessness. Qualifying event would be something like losing a job, having a medical bill they can't pay for. So that may not extend to the whole of the South Bay, but it's pretty alarming to think 1 out of 8. And what I hear most often, and I say this a lot, is that think about the 2 events. And that's where this happens the most, where it's one event happens. So you lose your job and then you have a medical bill you can't handle, or you lose your job and then you miss 2 car payments, or it's a lot of times it's that double event that then just leads to this is where we are.
Okay, so with that in mind, with that comment to both of you, the question then is, we're hearing all this noise level right now about the fact that the eviction moratorium is expiring, that extended unemployment benefits for COVID are going away. So there's a lot of anecdotal stuff. So what do you two think, or what are you hearing about how the COVID crisis is going to impact the homelessness problem here and elsewhere?
So if you want, Amber, I can just kind of start.
You can go ahead. I mean, it's going to exacerbate it.
It will, certainly where everyone's kind of anticipating that, but there is a great deal of federal funding that has already come into the system. Some of you who might be on Supervisor Hahn's email and some other people, the County of Los Angeles just announced today that they are having a rent relief program, and they're hoping, I was looking into it, they're hoping 8,000 to 9,000 households will be helped with this, and the City of Los Angeles has already initiated some of theirs. But I did want to just give you just a couple of numbers. I'm sorry, I'm an engineer, I like stats, so I apologize ahead of time. But for the first CARES Act, this is the $3 trillion initiative that already passed, of course. So of that, I'd say over $170 billion came into either the city or the County of Los Angeles. And that's why this program that I just mentioned, this rent relief, is being funded out of that. And that's specifically for funding for tenant and rental assistance and so forth. So, so that's kind of I mean, that's certainly not going to help everybody, but that's a good start. And I know that there's a lot of advocacy that everyone's doing and trying to get Congress to, the Washington to pass the HEROES Act, which could be, 1 to 2 to 3 trillion, depending on, what they decide. So that'll also make a huge impact. So we're really waiting for some of that funding to kind of come through. There is, so that's kind of the large chunk that has already been received. The state of California in March, after the pandemic first kind of hit the state, they also approved, it was a $100 million plan for the entire state. And of that, 40 million, came down to either the city or county of Los Angeles. So the good news is there is there's substantial funding coming in. Of course, it won't be able to help everybody, but it certainly will go a long way toward homelessness prevention. And that's really the key now, because we want to prevent those folks, like Amber was saying, from getting evicted. And it's not just people who are living in apartments, but sometimes it's affecting homeowners as well, because if they are renting out to tenants and their tenants aren't being able to pay,
right,
then the homeowner isn't able to make their payment, their house payment to the bank. So it really has unfortunately just a tragic ripple effect that we're hoping will really be stemmed by some of this federal funding that's coming through.
I will offer up that a good friend of mine is Pastor Lisa Williams, who's the pastor over at San Pedro United Methodist Church, with whom both Nancy and Amber work, I think, on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
Lisa's involved with the Harbor Neighborhood Relief Fund, which is—
Yes, I was actually just going to talk about it.
Oh, good. Then go ahead.
No, I mean, so Pastor Lisa is the chair of our Harbor Neighborhood Relief Fund. I sit on the executive committee as well. And kind of bringing this down to a micro level. So, Nancy was talking about, this funding that we're seeing. One thing I just wanted to quickly touch base on is pre-COVID, the numbers we loosely used that, each day in Los Angeles, we were housing 130 individuals and 150 were becoming homeless. So this also helps us understand that we are doing more than we've ever done before in this county, but the pipeline is more robust than ever before. And so that's why prevention is so important. It's because it's almost like stopping the bleed. We talk about that in healthcare, but we need to stop the bleed so that we can begin to work on this in a really substantial way and get underneath it. But with the level of folks coming into homelessness while we're trying to house those we've already been working with, it's just really, really intense, if you can imagine. So on the very ground level, I'll say throughout this pandemic, so we started this Harbor Neighborhood Relief Fund, which Pastor Lisa chairs. She's the perfect person to chair this. Having obviously, been a woman of faith, what her congregation is very much, leading with their values as well. Some of you may know that San Pedro United Methodist Church is planning on building affordable housing and permanent supportive housing on their site. So it's very impressive. But as this committee, we get applications each week from individuals who are struggling. And it's not a really unwieldy process. It's literally, what's going on with you? What do you need money for? And how can we help? And each week we look at applications and we hear people's stories, and they need $200, $300, $400 just to make ends meet. And some of that is food, some of that is gas, some of that is, a lot of that, we have families with children with special needs that need to make appointments, or they need special medications or things like that. And we actually aren't doing rental assistance as much because we're trying to leverage these other resources. And we always make sure with this cash, which is actually in the form of a gift card, we give people access to all of the robust resources we have here in the South Bay and in the Harbor area. So they get, like if they're having trouble with, procuring food, we also tell them where they can get that. If they're having, issues with, legal issues, we connect them to that. So that is one thing that we're doing on a micro level to be helpful, but it has pointed out to me how many families are having the experience of hardship for the first time in this. And we're hearing a lot of those stories. And that is not surprising, but it is very heartbreaking. And we also hear examples of folks that have tested positive for COVID and who cannot, because of that, go wait in line at food pantries. They're trying to be responsible. They're not going to go to the grocery store. They can't work. And so just that 2-week self-isolation period for them and their family is tremendously impactful on their ability to pay for anything.
So I'll just put into the chat box. If you open chat, you can get information about the Harbor Neighborhood Relief Fund. It's at feedandbefed.org.
Yeah.
I also want to point out that Stephanie has posted in the chat box a link to one of the studies that Nancy was recommending about redlining. The chat box will go away. So if those are things of interest to you, I just encourage you to copy and paste to somewhere else so that you can actually capture them. All right, so this has been great information. So let me turn slightly to a different topic, as you've been talking about all these things that cause housing and how we get there. So this has been around forever. I mean, the homelessness has been a problem that's been a problem for a long, long, long time, which would make people like me think it is utterly hopeless. But you know, I'm hearing that that's actually a myth and that there is something we can do about it. So Nancy, what is it we can do to fix the housing problem?
That's a big question. So we have of course you have a slide for that, but I really do. I appreciate, so slide 12. I do appreciate that Amber has already mentioned that through the countywide systems, we actually are housing record numbers of people, but unfortunately, you know, as she also pointed out, you know, she used the analogy of the bleed. I kind of use the analogy of kind of the spigot. We need to turn the spigot off or turn it down. So, but in answering this question though, we really do know how to house people and how to, not only how to get them into housing in the first place, but also how to make sure that they can live successful lives, because it's a huge transition when someone has been on the streets for many years and having them come inside, living independently and so forth. So it's a national kind of program, if you want to call it that. HUD definitely subscribes to this. It's called Housing First. And the idea being that there are no preconditions to getting people housing. Many years ago, certain housing programs used to have, for instance, sobriety as a condition for you to move into shelter or permanent housing. And what they found, though, is that the success rate is much higher if you just get people into housing with all of the concerns and all the challenges they have. And then once you're stably housed, then provide a lot of wraparound services to then address if they do have substance use issues, if they have past trauma, whatever it is that was causing their homelessness to begin with, then start to work on this. And it's also, not only is it a more humane way and a more successful way, but it actually is more cost effective to do that as well. So we do know how to do it but it just takes time, and it does take resources in terms of funding for the supportive services. And of course, the second bullet that we have here, again, we go back to this time and time again. The challenge here in Los Angeles County is just the lack of affordable units for people to move into. But again, we do know how to do it, and we've been doing it for many years. And again, just with all the additional funding coming in, that we'll also talk a little bit about some Measure H funding and so forth, that we are able to successfully move people into housing despite the numbers of the homeless count going up. Unfortunately, we are able to really take a lot of people. And what a lot of people who work in homeless services, what they tend to focus on as well, because of the way different people who are homeless are prioritized because of the limited resources, is they really focus on trying to get those people who are the most vulnerable, who have been on the streets for many years. How do we get them inside? How do we get them to a safe environment? And it just takes time, but they're very successful in doing that.
So Amber,
I want to quickly piggyback with two very quick things there. On housing, I just want to say that we talk about affordable housing. We absolutely need affordable housing, but we need to realize that what sets affordability is supply and demand. And so I always like to encourage people, just say yes to more housing. And that's something everyone can do. And nobody likes to hear this, but it's true. For Los Angeles County to really get underneath this, the county is going to have to look different than it did 10 years ago. So we will need more density. We will need more housing. There are more people here. And so I know that doesn't make everyone happy, but it's just a fact. If we're short a 500,000 units, we need to make them. Another thing I just wanted to give a little more detail to the economic cost savings, because I think this is a really
that was my question for you.
Okay, yeah. And it speaks to a lot of people's concerns, honestly, because I think a lot of us deep down, I think everyone has some humanitarian concern for this. This is the humanitarian crisis of our time in this city, in this state, and in most areas of this country. But a lot of people feel very torn about the idea of putting more into it. There's this perception that we've been taking care of people for so long. How much more can we give? And so there was a RAND study done in 2017 of a version of this housing first model called Housing for Health, which is low barrier, like Nancy talked about, where essentially you just need to get housed. And the cost savings of that in Los Angeles, so it's based on LA County, it's not like based on Cleveland or something like that, was for every dollar spent on housing and giving everyone all the services they need to be successful, we saved $1.20 as a county. So your taxes were saved. And so what we look at is about a 20% cost savings annually if we take care of housing and people based on a program like that, which is very successful. So I just want to share that with people that I think there's sometimes a hesitation if for some of us that are more fiscally conservative as well, that we just can't be investing in more. And I actually want to say, like, you can't afford not to invest in this, because the cost of keeping someone on the street and having them cycle through social services, the healthcare system, and possibly the prison system at times is so burdensome on us. Where why not choose the humane avenue as well and house them and give them what they need to feel stable and be on their road to whatever they need in life. So anyway, I just had to put some color on that.
I appreciate that very much. Okay, so turning to a slightly different topic, which is government resources. So Nancy, you alluded to this. You want to talk a little bit about some of these government resources that are available to help with the homeless problem? Kim, it's slide 18.
Sure. So let me talk a little bit about pre-COVID, because it's a little before and after type picture. So one of the main sources of revenue for services in LA County is Measure H, which was voted in, about 4 years ago or so. And this is a refresher. It's the quarter-cent sales tax. And for 10 years, it generates an estimated $250 million each year. And that's to fund services. So I have on the slide here, it's not brick and mortar. So it's not to actually build more housing units, but it's to provide the services like outreach workers, case managers, rental assistants. And we have a whole another chart that shows you what services are available. And I give talks before different city councils throughout this throughout the South Bay, and one of the questions that they always ask is, well, I don't see that money coming in. Where's that money? How's it being used here in Palos Verdes? How's it being used in Torrance? I don't really see, we're giving all this money in sales tax. So one of the things that I always like to point out, and you'll see in the last bullet, so we have down here Service Planning Area 8, which is the South Bay area. So it's the area, it's north as Inglewood, all the way down to the harbor area. That's all considered the South Bay. So within that region, you can see here where the first year was about 12.5 million, all the way to this past fiscal year, there were almost $22 million worth of contracts that did come into the South Bay. And the amount of money from Measure H is actually much greater than that, because this doesn't even include certain types of rental assistance. There's, I mentioned this Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. They have outreach workers. And so there's actually much more money coming into the South Bay. And that's just Measure H. There's also, HUD has, it's called the Continuum of Care competition every year, and that also brings in annually about $150 million. The VA has 2 primary programs for veterans who are experiencing homelessness, and that also brings in several hundred millions of dollars. So from a federal and local point of view, there's a tremendous resources that are coming into to the Los Angeles area.
Amber, did you want to add anything onto that? I mean, Kim, there's also one more. Why don't you put up slide 19?
And actually, if you go to the next slide, what this shows are just for the, so we have this program in LA County. It's called a Coordinated Entry System. And this is, you'll see this throughout the county, as I mentioned. And this is the main system, kind of an umbrella framework, if you want to call it that, for how people access the publicly funded services for homelessness. And this last one, this just has kind of a laundry list of just all the different services that are provided. For each one of these, there's specific services that I could go into. So for interim housing, for instance, that includes shelter, what you think of as, excuse me, emergency shelter. It also includes recuperative care beds for people that were in the hospital or in the medical system, and they just can't be released, excuse me, safely back on the street. So there are medical beds provided for them. We talked about all the different housing programs, but it's also legal services. So people, especially for people who are possibly facing eviction. And there's also employment services, benefits enrollment, and something called shallow subsidy, which is just a small amount of money that might be able to go to an individual or to a family member. Excuse me. And those are for people who do not need any kind of continuing case management, but they just need an extra, $300 a month to help them to kind of supplement perhaps their fixed income. So there's all kinds of programs that are in services that are being provided through coordinated entry system.
And Amber, are there others that you'd like to add on?
We have a lot of services. So I think this is, a good coverage of that.
All right, so you both are really passionate about this. Your passion comes through in so many ways. So can each of you spend just a tiny bit of time telling us why you got into this to begin with?
You can go first, Amber, while I get my voice back.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So I've been working in homeless services for about, 15 years, and poverty alleviation for about a little longer than that. And so even though I started my career down on Skid Row working with women experiencing homelessness specifically, and continued on with families and still do that in my work, it's commonly known, at least for those that know me or have heard my story, that my advocacy work and my passion for this got so much deeper and so much more personal about 3 years ago when I was pregnant with my second child and had some perinatal mental health issues. And this was actually while I was working back on Skid Row. I was contracting as a C-suite officer for a homeless service agency. And I realized that what I was going through was just so similar to so many women that I saw and worked with. And the only difference between me and them was resources. And I still was suffering and was having a very, very hard time where I almost felt like I lost everything. And so as part of my healing and part of getting better, quote unquote, I could never look away again. And so my advocacy work became so deeply personal and kind of ran through everything in my life after that, because I realized that we were failing. We were failing so many people out there, and just didn't want it to happen. I mean, I just couldn't have it anymore. Let's put it that way. Couldn't have it anymore.
How about you, Nancy?
Okay, mine's a little bit shorter. I just to keep it brief, I do this as just a way of kind of living out my Christian values and just doing what I really feel I've been called to do. So that's why I primarily do it. And I'm very appreciative to my church, St. Peter's by the Sea, because through our mission committee, and I've been a member there and on the committee for over 25 years, I was able to get a lot of experience volunteering with many of the social service agencies that are in the South Bay. And so I could really see what the need was and just being able to help. So about 7 or 8 years ago, I had this opportunity to join the coalition, and I just felt like that was just God telling me what to do. And it was really a culmination of a lot of my past experiences and a lot of the leadership skills I'd learned from a lot of different ways, from when I was in aerospace and organizing other campaigns at church and so forth. And I just felt it really put me in a great spot to kind of join the coalition and to just use some of the gifts that I was blessed with.
So someone had put in the chat box exactly where we were headed next, which was to talk about how do we get involved directly. So you two have shared your story, and we're going to talk a little bit about some different ways that people can influence this issue if it's something that motivates you. But before I get into those specifics, I want to ask this question. We talked about this before among us, but I think everybody needs to hear your responses, which is, Well, there's this notion out there that it's not a good idea if you see if a homeless person comes up to you and asks you for cash, that it's not a good idea to give them cash. This notion that they're going to then go out and just use it to buy alcohol. And I'd love to hear your responses to that, your thoughts about that for this audience. What do you think? Is that the way? Is that a good way to address or help this issue?
So I'll jump in here because I feel pretty strongly about this. So I said this before, my caveat on this is that I've worked in homeless services as a staff member, and we were always told we were not allowed to give cash to anyone for very obvious reasons. But I have continued that as a kind of value and trend in a way. And what I instead do is I keep water and usually breakfast bars in my car. That's what I tell people. And because people also want to be seen. And I use it as an opportunity to just acknowledge someone. Say good morning, do you want a water? Do you want a breakfast bar? Because I also don't like saying no, to be honest. I'd like to give another option. This also goes into another theme that maybe we'll touch on about dropping things off, dropping food off, dropping things off in general. And something I always like to remind people of is, when we see someone suffering out there, there's this impulse that I want to do something. I want to help. I can do something. And I always ask people to stop because it's not actually about you. It's about the person in front of you. So I ask people to stop and think about what they need and what they want. And that's a better way for us to frame how best we can help folks. And if you feel safe, you can also ask people what they need and they want. But this is one of the reasons I carry water and breakfast bars, because it's something simple. And a lot of people just need and want to be seen and to feel their humanity acknowledged by somebody else.
And Nancy, what about you?
So I agree a lot with what Amber was saying, but the way I like to tell people is I will actually never tell people to not give money. And because there just is that feeling that you do want to reach out. Sometimes the people, if you see them in your neighborhood, you kind of hear their story. They may just need a few dollars here and there to do something. Maybe they need a bus ride or something. And so, but one of the things I do agree with Amber, I personally don't give out money to people anymore. Quite honestly, I used to before I started doing more work with homeless services and some providers and so forth. But what I encourage people to do as an alternative, as well as what Amber was suggesting, as far as giving out a water or maybe some energy bars and so forth, is I know that your church has a great tradition of on Communion Sunday, where you have the basket. When you go for communion, you're asked, if you have any spare change, some dollars, and that money goes to providing meals at Project Needs and perhaps some other ministries that you work with. So when you feel real tempted, when you see people on the streets, when you get home, maybe whatever money you may have wanted to give those people, maybe set it aside and either give it to your congregation, because I'm sure it'll go to places of great need, or if service providers, donate to your favorite organization. And I think that's also one way that I think you'll be helping the problem as well.
Yeah.
So.
And just piggybacking off that on the donating to organizations, one of the reasons, I know Nancy probably will agree with me, not dropping off lots of food, or we want to encourage people to come seek help from organizations and connect with organizations. And that's one of the reasons I think of food or people needing to go to get meals. I mean, it's like a gateway to the rest of the services that could possibly benefit them as well. So I really like to encourage people to encourage the people getting food from service providers instead of from you.
All right, well, that's a perfect segue to then the next piece, which is identifying some things that if this is something people feel passionate about, kinds of ideas. So what I'd like to do is, Nancy has compiled a whole bunch of stuff on a couple slides. So Kim, why don't you pop up slide 21. But I think what would be helpful is there's a lot of stuff on there, and we're not going to have time to go through all of this. It's a lot of stuff. So I think it'd be great if each of you could talk about kind kind of from your perspective, what's something that people could do? I mean, like, so from Nancy, from your perspective, like what's the biggest thing or the most important thing you think that people could do?
So quite frankly, and because I am talking to the faith community, I always emphasize, please pray for not just the people who are experiencing homelessness or those who are in kind of a precarious situation where they might be in danger of losing their housing, but include in those the people who work professionally within homeless services. I see these line staff and they just have tremendous challenges. I don't know how they have I am so inspired whenever I go to agencies like Harbor Interfaith or Rainbow Services or some of the other local agencies that we have in the South Bay, to see the dedication that these men and women have. They have the toughest job to me, and just staying motivated and just working with the people, working with the system, and just everything they have to do on a day-to-day basis. So please pray for all the workers as well. The second thing I mentioned here is with any of your efforts, because I work so much in the South Bay, I really would like to emphasize that we have so many homeless here in the South Bay. We have over 4,500 people who are experiencing homelessness, again, based on the count. And we have 65% more unsheltered homeless than they have living in Skid Row. So there are really a lot of opportunity to help those folks just in our backyard. So those are the primary things that I'd like people to just kind of remember. And then I think we're going to talk about donations of just goods.
We're going to get to that in a second. Kim, why don't we switch to 22 while we listen to Amber talk about her view of kind of things.
Okay.
So Amber?
I'm just talking to myself over here.
Yeah,
So on a large scale, vote. I mean, and we will have a ballot measure. LA County will have a measure on the ballot in November called, I don't know what the letter will be yet. It might be X, for Reimagine LA. And I really encourage people to go just check out Google Reimagine LA. And it's an effort that the supervisors, as of last week, are including on the ballot to take 10% of the county budget and reallocate it towards homelessness, equity, a bunch of issues. The way I kind of pithicize it is, it's a measure that is aimed to put our money where our values are. And so I encourage people to check that out. And if that is something where your values feel aligned with that use of our taxpayer money, I encourage you to vote and to get others to check it out as well. So that's kind of a large thing you can do, because obviously the more resources we have locally, the more nimble we can also be. Sometimes with federal funding, for example, they have a very set way of things need to be done and reported, and it may not exactly apply to us as well. So I just want to be careful about that. So local funding is amazing, and it's a little more nimble. So that's something we could do on this large level. But then this is where it may sound a little esoteric, but I spent a lot of time talking to people, and actually I'm looking around who's on this call, and I really encourage people to take a step back and think about what you are best at. Like, what are your particular gifts and talents as a person? I'm not of the belief that every single person needs to do, what Nancy and I do and spend time in encampments and maybe be, advocating for things. But what are you good at? What are your talents? So I'm looking around this call. We have folks on here who are occupational therapists. We have a woman on here who is experienced in trauma-informed modalities. We have someone on here who's in recovery and is very passionate about that. And so it's really important to sit down and think, what do I do for a living? Who is my network? What am I best at? And how can I take those skills and those strengths and apply it towards this? And so, and that may sound a little abstract, but talk to someone about it. Get together with someone else on this call even afterwards and sit together and talk about what do you think I could contribute? And I think it's also a great thing to get involved with local coalitions like the one, Nancy runs, she's co-chair of, or I run one called the CD15 Working Group on Homelessness. And it's nice to be around other people that want to work on these issues and are finding their own personal way of making their dent, of making impact with this. So think about what you're best at. But another big one that, you know, we cover on this is just see people, greet people. Don't be afraid to acknowledge someone. I think we're pretty good as humans of having a read on whether or not a situation is safe. If someone feels safe to you, it's okay to say hi. It's okay to say good morning. It's okay to be going into your coffee shop and say, do you want a cup of coffee? Find the ways that you feel comfortable volunteering. And if that's through your church or through your congregation, push your congregation maybe to do a little more. Maybe instead of doing what is kind of prescribed to you, like we have to do this meal thing this one day a month, or we are going to do this toy drive, which are all great, don't get me wrong, but maybe your congregation or a bunch of people in your congregation or your group have some special gifts and talents that you could actually use in a different way. Maybe something that's slightly more impactful.
Those are great. And
can I say something, Kathy, just real quickly? I'm sorry, I think I appreciate what Amber was saying, because a lot of us do have certain interests, and some of those interests might even be like, you like to cook. So once we get out of this kind of post-COVID and we're back to hopefully more normal circumstances where people are having classes and so forth, those might be, if you have hobbies or gardening. But I wanted to just mention something on this list. Number 5 mentioned something about tutoring school-age children with School on Wheels. And I really would like to, as an example, lift up that organization, because when you go through the 1-hour training that they have, what you'll find is it isn't the fact that you're helping a child with their homework or helping them pass a test or something. While that is important, the really crucial thing for School on Wheels that they emphasize is you might be the only consistency that this child has in tutoring them once a week, just because their lives are so torn apart, living in shelters or living in a car or whatever the situation is. And just having that consistency, that sense of normalcy, just goes a long way toward helping that child. So I just wanted to kind of lift that up. But a lot of these other opportunities also provide that sense of just community and just compassion that I think we can all share. So thank you for.
And they're great ideas. So I just want everybody to understand, the only thing we were going to end with was, in terms of the presentation, was just talking about what Rolling Hills is going to be launching here this month. But before I get to that, one of the people in the chat room, and then we were going to open it to questions, but one of the questions that actually came up in the chat room is relevant to this conversation, which is this notion about services and how people can help. The question from Kathy Christie, who's involved with Harbor Interfaith, is we have Harbor Interfaith Services, Rainbow Services, and Family Promise. And she's asking, what are the differences between these, and are there other agencies like that that are serving the South Bay?
Sure. Well, let me just take a quick stab at that. So there's several agencies working in the South Bay. Mostly they distinguish themselves by what population they work with. So Rainbow Services specializes in working with men and women who are fleeing domestic violence. Harbor Interfaith, actually, I mentioned this coordinated entry system, so they are the lead for that. So they also are known for, they have family programs, but they also have a great food pantry. There's other organizations like 1736 Family Crisis Center that's also based here in, well, they have an office in Torrance. They also have domestic violence. There's other agencies that focus on transitional age youth or young adults. There's ones that might focus on veterans. And the reason we have the specialization is because of the past trauma that many of these people have experienced. There are different ways that we want to help those people, and they may have unique needs. So that's why you see organizations kind of specializing in certain populations generally. So that's kind of the difference. If people are interested, they can certainly, my contact information I think is on the last page. I'll be happy, and I'm sure Amber is as well. We can talk to you about if you have a specific interest, like maybe your passion is to help children. So there's a lot of organizations that we can suggest that do specialize in that particular population.
Okay, I'm going to talk for a minute about what Rolling Hills is launching on the homeless front. But before I do that and we move to those slides, let me just say we do have some time for questions. And there are a couple different ways you can do that. We've got 40 some odd participants here, so we can't just have everybody calling out. It's craziness. But you can do two different things. If you move your mouse around, it will open up the controls on your Zoom. And there's two different things that you can use. One is if you go to the chat feature, you can actually type a question into the chat box. The other is if you click on the participants list, that'll show you everybody on, but more importantly, there's the ability there to click a button to raise your hand. And when you raise your hand, it lets us know that you have a question to ask, and then we can call on you. So if you are interested in asking a question, please do either of those. Please either type your question into the chat box or click on to raise your hand while we talk briefly about what Rolling Hills is doing. So Kim, do you want to go to slide number 24? So starting this month, and we're launching this actually the first weekend in September in connection with our communion pickup, we're looking to two different things. One is to help with the newly housed. So these are the kind of people that Amber and Nancy were talking about that have been placed into either temporary or more permanent housing. Well, for this case, it's really the more permanent housing. These are people who are now getting an apartment for the first time, and they now need to supply it. So they need all the kinds of things you need when you first step into an apartment. And Harbor Interfaith, who we've already talked about, is the organization that's responsible for pulling those together. They have a list of things that they include in what they call these welcome home kits. So our goal is to put together 10 complete welcome home kits. It includes all the kinds of things you might think of if you were starting an apartment fresh. And we have the list that was in the most recent Cornerstone. We're going to have another email out talking about that. Chris Campbell priced that for us today and estimates if we bought everything at Target, the price for the entire kit would be about $330. So again, we're looking to collect 10 full welcome home kits. The other thing we're doing for those who are still on the streets, and this is on all directions, and that is we're looking for donations of new packages of new socks, new underwear, and feminine hygiene products. The reason for this to be new or unopened packages is because there are a lot of issues with, right now, as you might imagine, with COVID and other things, there are all sorts of issues related to sanitation and concerns about that. So Lisa, Pastor Lisa, has specifically asked for things that were socks, underwear, feminine hygiene, which are appreciated no matter where we're working. And just for those of you who are in the Rolling Hills congregation and aren't aware of this, we've had a long tradition in our church of actually working with folks in the entire South Bay. So we've had a long history of partnering with St. Paul's United Methodist Church up in Redondo Beach and assisting with their Project Needs program and helping to feed the homeless there. But we've also had a long affiliation with Toberman House, which doesn't cater specifically to the homeless, but they provide the kind of services that help a lot of homeless in that area, the San Pedro area. We also have done a lot of work with Harbor Interfaith. So we kind of sit in between. We're like at the epicenter of the entire South Bay, and we have zero homeless population. So we have a lot of capacity to do what Amber and Nancy were talking about, which is to take that compassion that we have and put it to use with helping some of these organizations that are making a big difference. Now, with that, there was another question in the chat box, which was from Emily. She was asking for Nancy and Amber, what are you most hopeful toward currently?
I guess I could speak. What we spoke about earlier about how we're doing more than ever before. We really are. And I see it and I feel it out there. And I know the need is greater and the need is overwhelming, but we really are making a huge difference. And we need to continue to do more, but we have this great running start now. And we're really trying to make up for decades of neglect here on this population and on all of the systems that impact it. So what I'm hopeful for is that we are starting to see success stories and we're starting to see people go home and feel home and heal. And we now know how to do that. So it's just a matter of resources and us just keep doing it.
So I guess I'm hopeful that through seminars like this and opportunities like this to become more educated, that the general public is just going to be more empathetic to those who are experiencing homelessness and not just have them marginalized, and really understand, and when they see somebody, not to look away, and like what Amber was saying, just to provide them some sense of dignity, because we're all people and we're all God's children. We all need to help each other. And I think just looking at and along those same lines, just when you do see someone who is experiencing homelessness, that you try not to prejudge how they look or what circumstance may have landed them in the situation that they're in, because quite frankly, that could happen to any of us or some of our friends or neighbors as well. So that's my greatest hope, is that people will just, as a society, we just become more caring, and again, I know individuals and congregations are really helping to lead that effort.
Actually, I just want to say that the faith-based community really makes me hopeful. Pastor Lisa Williams and I actually talk about this a lot. And I'm actually grew up Muslim, and I'm not particularly involved in any community right now, but I see the faith community as this pre-aligned community of folks that already believe in something bigger than them. And so taking that belief and that value and applying it to this situation, it's this population of folks that have the potential to just make a huge impact on this. So I think there's power in just the larger faith community.
That's great. I don't see any other questions in the chat, and nobody has their hand raised. So I think that may be the end of our program. I have to say thank you to both Nancy and Amber. Your passion is contagious. It's amazing to watch the work or to listen to the work that you're doing, and really terrific. We really appreciate your time. And Nancy, thank you. I can't thank you enough for putting together this amazing PowerPoint.
Thank you for inviting us to speak and opening your hearts, your minds, your space to this, because it's tough stuff. I mean, it's easier to look away, but we can't. We can't.
And I want to thank everybody who showed up at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night after you've been zooming all the time. And so it's great to have so many people who are interested in this. And the question just came through about, will the PowerPoint be available? I have to get Nancy's permission for that. So
sure, it's probably easier if you put a PDF on, but I'm happy to have you share.
And then the slides are being available. So yeah, we will try to post that along with the video. We're hoping we got it all worked out to have the video posted as well. So anyway, thank you everybody. We really appreciate you coming and participating. And thank you again, Nancy and Amber. Really terrific input. We really appreciate it.
Thank you again for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.